You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi, and thanks again for tuning in to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. We have a different show this week. Not only do we not have a middle section, but our main guest, in fact our only guest, is a hiker and a dietitian, and she's talking about food on the trail, with plenty of ideas as to why you may wish to rethink your food options. Her name is Owens Mayhew, or Sling. As you'll hear in our chat, I am utterly clueless on this subject, but even I came away with a few tips that have made me think further about my food choices. And the reason we don't have a middle section today is that I'm on the verge of starting to follow our woman of a certain age, Kate Stillwell, where we're going to follow the fortunes of Kate, or Phoenix, where she attempts a flip-flop of the trail from Harper's Ferry on April the 1st. You may remember that the original plan was to give Kate a separate show, but I thought she would fit better into my show in much the same way as Jessa did in 2017. I'm not quite ready to start that section yet, and I don't want to add something just for the sake of it. And frankly, I messed up trying to get something else into the show for today and maybe next week. So my plans have shifted a little, and I'll be introducing Kate to the show next Thursday, March the 5th. Hopefully, all that makes sense. Finally, today we do have a new book to read, and it is Grandma Gateway's Walk by Ben Montgomery. Following the popularity of Paul Stutzman's Hiking Through, I wanted another really solid story, and Ben gave me and the show that opportunity. So thanks, Ben. So, recognising that the show will be a little shorter than usual, here is Owens Mayhew, or Sling. Now, many of you will be aware that hiking the Appalachian, and in fact any of the other long-distance trails, is an opportunity for utterly guiltless eating. In fact, gluttony. You can bang down 5,000 calories a day of all things you probably shouldn't eat, and you still lose weight. It is magical. But my guest today says that we may be going about our hiking diet the wrong way. This is Owens Mayhew. Hi, Erin. How are you?
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me. Having a good time.
So tell me then, why are you Sling?
That's actually a funny story. Well, I don't know if it's a funny story, but I'm originally from Seattle prior to being on the PCT, where we see very little sunlight. So I was extremely nervous about being in the desert without an umbrella. So this was the first time I'd ever backpacked with an umbrella, and I had it essentially zip tied to my shoulder strap on my backpack.
Right.
So it put a lot of pressure on my shoulder, which sent a pain down to my elbow, some kind of nerve pain, and what ended up happening is I got so constricted with my shoulder that I threw my shoulder out.
Wow.
So on the very last day on the PCT, I ended up carrying my backpack on my right arm like a purse, with my left arm wrapped around my body with my tent footprint in a sling.
I got it.
It was horrible, but I was so stubborn because I'd quit my job. I was 40 years old hiking the PCT. I was like, I'm going to do this. So like any stubborn hiker,
right.
That's what you do. So I became Sling.
So you earned your name. Well done.
I earned my name.
Well, you're on the road at the moment, aren't you? In fact, you're constantly on the road. Is that correct?
Actually, yes. We just pulled into Carlsbad, New Mexico. We've only been here about an hour.
All right. Well, I appreciate you trying to find some Wi-Fi to come and have a chat with us. And before my listeners start rolling their eyes and thinking that you've come up with a crackpot plan to reduce what you can carry and make it as efficient as you possibly can, I think we need to hear your credentials on the subject because they are quite impressive.
Yes, I'm a registered dietitian, and I've actually been one for just shy of 19 years now. I've worked in a variety of different fields of nutrition, but currently I'm focusing 100% on hiking and backpacking nutrition.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that. So you are a dietitian, but you're specifically working on one particular area.
Yes.
Is there a reason for that? Or there's something do you think you've just discovered something that a lot of other people don't know, which hopefully you're going to tell us in a minute?
Actually, I fell into this as a result of a midlife crisis. It's a bit of a funny story.
Yeah.
I didn't learn about backpacking nutrition in school 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It actually happened. I was in a position that I'd been in for 10 years, just was really unhappy, getting ready to turn 40 years of age. It was like, I think this is a midlife crisis. I need to make some changes.
Yeah.
So I decided to quit my job like a lot of thru hikers do and decided to thru hike the PCT.
Right.
And preparing for that, I realized that food is going to be a really big deal. I've always been an athlete my entire life, so I know how much food I need to eat, and I eat a lot of food. So when I started doing the math and figuring out how much that actually weighed in my backpack, that I just like, I can't physically carry all this food. It's just not possible. And being a dietitian, I was like, there's absolutely no way that I'm not going to finish the trail because I can't eat enough. So
Right.
that's
Right.
where my focus on backpacking transitioned into backpacking food, as I spent all my energy figuring out how am I going to maintain the diet that I have in the front country where I'm healthy and strong and able to be an athlete while I'm also backpacking, but also able to stay healthy and strong and not lose 40 pounds on the trail.
Well,
At that time, go ahead.
that's interesting. Most people want to lose 40 pounds. Just, I mean, I was very happy. I lost 60 pounds first time and 50 pounds second time. So you've already told us that you've got the dietitian's chops, but now you've got the hiker chops as well. So your hiking experience is you did the PCT and you were looking to maintain weight, or what were you trying to do? Were you trying to eat as healthy as possible or try to translate the diet you had in so-called real life onto the trail?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
At the time, I was fairly fit at the time.
Right.
Now, after writing a cookbook, I've had a few extra pounds on me after writing a high-calorie cookbook. But at the
Yeah.
time, I didn't have the extra 40 pounds to lose. So I was really nervous about how am I going to perform to be able to do this? Because I'd heard so many people saying, oh, I lost 40 pounds, but they had that to lose. I did not. So that was actually going to be a real problem. And also I know, like I said, I know how I eat. And if I don't eat well, I bonk. And when I bonk, it typically takes me at least a few hours to recover from that. And when you're trying to pull 20 and 25-mile days, you don't have time to take 3 hours off to sit around and wait for your body to
Yeah.
recover.
Yeah.
So
But hang on, before you move on from that though. So as I understand it, and I'm wrong, I may be wrong here because I often am, but I know that a lot of the men on the trail do lose a shed load of weight, but the women don't seem to lose quite as much. And I guess intuitively it seems that women, what's the expression? Women get toned and men get the dinosaur look. They get the huge lower half and the puny upper body. Is there a dietitian's reason for that, or is that not even true?
that is a true phenomenon, I guess you could say. Women tend to just get a lot leaner. I think it's the way our metabolism is. We just tend to, our body composition changes from fat to muscle.
Right.
Because women, I think we naturally have a larger percentage of body fat. That's just how many of us are built, not everyone.
Right.
And men have a less percentage of body fat. So when they do lose that extra percentage, they're going to notice it a lot more. Wow. And women are just going to get leaner.
Is that the efficiency, or is it, by the way, as I said to you before, I was worried about doing this conversation because I'm talking from the idiot's point of view. I know nothing about this at all. So is that because the way in which we as men burn calories and you as women burn calories?
That's a good question. I actually don't have a good answer for that.
Oh, excellent.
So I'm not going to say a whole lot more because I don't have a good answer.
Right.
But that is a common phenomenon that we've all noticed. And that's just been my experience, that women tend to, their body composition just changes in that way.
Right. So how do you, as a dietitian then, look at diet on a backpacking trip? And I presume anything more than about 4 or 5 days, the same parameters apply, don't they?
Right. And actually, like I think I said before, I try to take my front country diet into the backcountry because my body's used to eating a certain way. So
Sure.
Why would you change how you normally function in day-to-day life into something that's out of the ordinary?
Well, the answer to that, though, is, sorry, I know I'm going to interrupt you because I'm just getting myself to understand how this works. So the answer to that would be because the availability of food in a lot of cases isn't there, is it?
Availability in what way?
Well, the availability to resupply in the same sort of food you had in as you say, the front country as in the back country.
Oh, okay. So this is where I take my front country food and convert it into backpacking food.
Right.
So
okay.
This is where my specialty comes in, where I've taken all my focus on backpacking nutrition specifically. As at home, my normal breakfast is granola and yogurt and some berries. So I transition that into a backpacking version of freeze-dried yogurt, freeze-dried berries, and granola. So I'm getting the same nutrition that I would at home, the same food that I really enjoy eating, without having to have this honey bun or the Pop-Tarts or those kind of things, because those are easy and cheap, but they're not going to provide you the same amount of nutrition. And my body in particular, I'm not used to that sugar. So my body's going to react significantly differently eating that type of breakfast all of a sudden when your body's not accustomed to it. So same kind of thing. Let's say you like to have I don't know, pita and hummus or something at home, then you just take dehydrated hummus in the backcountry. So you're eating a similar type of diet as you would at home.
Wow. Now that's something I didn't pick up, because I've done a tiny amount of research, the best way I possibly could, because a lot of this stuff kind of goes over my head, and I really don't understand it. I mean, I was the one who would reach for the oatmeal and reach for biscuits and gravy, freeze-dried foods and as many Snickers as possible, because that is the easiest way to do it. So, but you're saying you literally do try to eat the same way on trail, off trail as on trail.
Yes. And that's actually what I do. If I'm not willing to eat my backpacking food at home, it's not going with me. So it has to be something I'm willing to eat on a day-to-day basis, regardless of what I'm doing.
Right. Because of the differing calorie burn, I presume, that you do on the trail that you don't do at home, there must be some adjustment there, isn't there?
Right. Well, obviously portion size. You're going to eat a much larger portion.
All right.
And then let's say you're having a plain bowl of oatmeal at home. So for breakfast on trail, you would, instead of using just water to add to the packet, you would use a whole milk powder, add some extra nuts, add some extra peanut butter or nut butter of some sort, add some extra fruit. So you're just going to take what you would normally have at home and just beef it up a little bit. Same thing with like pasta. Instead of just having pasta and some macaroni and cheese powder, add some extra butter powder to it, add extra whole milk powder, maybe even a little bit of olive oil, or even some freeze-dried meat of some sort to beef or something like that, to add extra nutrition to it, to beef it up more.
I never knew there was such a thing as butter powder.
Oh, yeah. Cream cheese powder is amazing.
Is it? Really? Really?
Yes.
Where'd you buy that sort of stuff?
The particular brand I use is Hoosier Hero Farm, and actually have a key lime cream cheese dip that's pretty delicious that I eat as a dessert.
Oh my gosh. So let me understand this. So instead of you just chucking water onto something, do you actually do cooking on the trail with your butters and your different tastes, or do you prepare it all and then just shove water on top of it? Is that basically how you do it?
I essentially do freezer bag cooking, which is just prepare it all at home in a bag, add some water, and then dinner's ready. And that's part of my being impatient and being hungry. If my dinner's not ready in 5 minutes or less, that's another meal that's not going on the trail with me.
Right. So not only is it giving you the same nutrition and more probably because as we've said, because the calories and the calories you burn, I guess, but that also. You've prepared that at home, and you could eat that at home, but it would be about 3 or 4 times as much as you actually need. Is that right?
Correct.
Right. Okay. So let's move on from there a second then. So how often should people eat, and is it important to eat differently while you're hiking as opposed to after you've hiked for the day? Because the reason I asked that, I know that somebody I hiked with in 2014 told me she thought that you eat protein at a certain time. After you finish hiking, you should get more protein, because otherwise all it does is turn to wind when you eat it if you're walking. Is that possibly true?
Yes. So going back to when you should eat while you're hiking, it really depends on how long you're going for during the day. So if you're less than about 2 hours, you can really get away with kind of eating whatever you want because you're going to go home soon enough. It's going to be mealtime again. So you're not going to have to focus on it as much.
Sure.
Anytime after about 2.5 hours, you should really start thinking about eating at least a little bit of something every 60 to 90 minutes.
Oh, really? As much as that?
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I do when I'm through hiking, and you're putting in 20 plus mile days, you're out there for 12 hours. You've got to really fuel yourself. You can't put down 1,000 calories at once and feel very good. So if you're constantly just kind of eating a little bit as you go, then your body's going to constantly be fueled really well. You're not going to have those sugar highs and lows, so you're not going to bonk. So you're going to be stronger consistently throughout the day. So that kind of translates into about 240 calories-ish an hour every 90 minutes or so. And then answering your question about the protein, yes, it is good to have protein at the end of the day. However, it's significantly less than what most people think. It's only about 15 to 20 grams of protein. And then it's actually better, too, if you eat a little bit of carbohydrate with that, because they work together and that'll help you recover better.
Yeah, I want to talk about the combination of foods later actually, because that's something that when the information you sent me, that made me interested. But I want to come to that in a minute. So 240 calories every 80 or 90 minutes, you say, well, that's a Snickers bar, isn't it?
Right.
I mean, that's easy.
Snickers is 240, yeah.
Right, exactly. I knew it was exactly 240.
It's pretty close.
I always remember eating them. So, but that probably isn't the right way to do it, is it?
Right. Well, I'm going to say I do eat Snickers bars.
Good.
I call it my happy food. There are
Right.
those foods that you just need to have to get you through the day because we've all
Yeah.
been on trail, especially the AT when it's pouring down rain day after day and it's just miserable.
Yeah.
So there are those times that you need to just have something that's going to be a mood lifter and get you through the day. So this is when I'm on trail, I like to think about combination foods.
Okay.
And I would call my definition of combination foods would be something that has carbohydrate, protein, and fat in every single bite. Because that way you're maximizing each little gram of food that you're carrying on your back to get the most out of it. So an example of that would be instead of white rice that has carbs with no protein or very little and very little fiber, if any, I would change that to using lentils, which has a high amount of protein, it has a lot of fiber, has some fat in it, so it has all the nutrition in the same amount of food volume-wise that you have to eat that you would have in, let's say, half a cup of rice.
Well, hang on. This is opening up my eyes a little bit further, obviously. But I say, I told you, but this is going to be a tricky one for me because I just don't understand this stuff, and the idea of a combination food, which is something as you know, it struck me when I saw one of the videos you showed me. So the combination, the idea is to get a balance of everything in every mouthful, and therefore just having carbs screws up other things. Is that correct?
Well, you're just going to have to eat that much more of the nutrition you didn't have in that one bite later on.
Okay.
So if you're missing out, like I said, let's say the lentils, let's say you choose the white rice over lentils in this particular meal, the protein that you would have gotten in that bite, you now have to make up for later because you didn't have it at lunch. Now you need to at least get it at dinner time. So that's just that much more food that you're going to have to eat later to make sure you get enough protein in the day so that you're able to recover.
Well, I can understand the theory behind that. So do you have then, does one get a list of the right sort of carbs and the amount of stuff that gets into each bite? I mean, is there, do you have combinations that make sense? You've just told the lentils and stuff. I mean, maybe that's the sort of thing because, we can all see what's on the label, and the zero added sugars thing is an important thing, but and lots of fiber is an important thing. But in terms of protein and carbohydrates, is there some balance between those things as well that you need to be taking care of?
Well, and then this is where my fun food comes in too. So there are those foods that may not be as nutritious that I will enjoy. And then, like I was just saying, then I'll make up later.
Right.
So if you want to look specifically, I look at it as a 24-hour time period, I guess is the best way to do it. Yeah. I try to do the best I can to eat the combinations throughout the day. But if there is a food in particular that I really want that's not as good, then I will enjoy that and then maybe have it later.
Do you eat something that negates the effects of that food?
Ask me that again.
Well, if you're eating a Snickers, for example, which you know isn't good for you, is there something you can eat which negates the bad effects of a Snickers?
Oh, actually, well, Snickers, I wouldn't say have bad effects.
Excellent.
Yeah, Snickers actually is a good combination food, believe it or not, because it has fat, it has some protein, and it has carbs, and has all the things. So I actually call it a combination food.
All right.
But it's not one that you want to eat over and over and over again. But it actually is in my regular diet when I'm backpacking.
Right.
But yeah, if you want to look at the day as a whole, if you really want to get into the nitty gritty, for backpackers, if you want to look at total protein, like you were just mentioning, reading food labels, is that when you're backpacking, especially through hikers, when you're really doing a lot of muscle trauma every day, is 1.2 grams to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of your body weight. So if you can figure out that math, that will give you your daily goal and just split that up through the day, whether 3 meals, 5 snacks, however your day looks, just split that up over the day. And that'll give you an idea when you're reading your food label, this meal really meets that goal. This one does not. So maybe I should add in a handful of nuts to get that balanced.
So does that, and eating that 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of your body weight, it means actually by definition, the heavier you are, the more protein you have to eat. And does that then maintain you at your weight, or does that lose you a small amount? I mean, what is that supposed to do?
That is keeping you from losing your muscle mass. That's not going to have anything to do with your weight. Your weight is going to be dependent upon your calories that are going in. So those calories can be protein, fat, or carb sources of calories. So that's what's going to keep your weight on. The protein is going to help wasting away your muscle mass.
Right. As everybody can hear, I really am clueless on this. And you very kindly sent me a couple of videos, which was very helpful for me. Although it didn't really, it gave me more questions than answers. Not because you weren't saying it properly, but because things come up in my mind all the time when I see things like this. And one of the things that the videos was called Debunking the Golden Rule. And in that one, you speak about the 2 pounds a day myth. I'm not sure it is a myth, but maybe that's what people believe, that they take 2 pounds a day. That is what they should be eating. Can you explain what you mean by debunking the golden rule?
This is going to get a lot of attention probably from your listeners, as I strongly disagree with the 2 pounds of food per day rule. Reasoning for that, and I realize it's been around for years and years and years, and I've practiced it myself. And for me, and I'm recognizing this with other folks, is it just doesn't work very well. So to really simplify it, let's look at this way. You've got 2 pounds of rice and 2 pounds of lentils. So that same volume and weight of food is very different nutrition. So let's look at an example of typical hiker diet. Hopefully this doesn't offend anybody, but let's just say you've got the Pop-Tarts, the honey buns, tortillas, Snickers, and all these things that are typically more highly processed, have higher sugar, lower fiber, sometimes have lower protein, and 2 pounds of that food versus 2 pounds of, let's say you've taken your diet that you ate at home and converted that into backpacking dry food. You're going to get so much more nutrition. You're going to meet those protein goals. You're going to have a good fiber. You're going to stay energized during the day. You're just going to feel better. And if you do it really well, you may actually only have to eat 3/4 of that amount of weight for the same amount of nutrition.
That's interesting.
So, like on the PCT, I was eating 5,000, 6,000 calories a day and 2 pounds of food. And people were in awe. They're like, how could you do that? I was like, well,
sure. Well, funny enough, one of our previous guests, Jessie Gregor, or Pipes, she did the whole of the PCT in the keto diet. And she said she actually put on a couple of pounds when she did, and she felt fantastic at the end of every day. So is that the idea being that's how her diet worked for her? And so she felt great. So if you've got a diet that works for you before you go out there, and let's face it, most of us probably don't have a diet that works well for us before we go out there, which is why, in my case, I was overweight, I guess. So if I brought my diet out to the trail, it wouldn't have been very good. So there's the diet you have in your real life, which you then translate to the backpacking, that is a diet that you worked out as a dietitian, which is good for you as well.
Right.
Okay. So I understood that. So now,
well, and I'm not saying too, so let's say the typical hiker diet, if that's something you really enjoy and it works for you, then don't rock the boat. I mean, if that's what's working for you, then great. If it's not, then I guess what I'm suggesting is here's an alternative thought, the way that maybe changing your mindset of how to do something a little differently to see if it works a little better.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And to be honest with you, with so much sugar, I did feel kind of down several times, and who knows what it was? You just never know. Perhaps it was that. I don't know. And one of the and you mentioned in one of the videos that you showed me as well that your mindset shifted once you regarded hiking and backpacking as a sport. So how did that change your mindset once you realized this was a sport?
Well, that goes all the way back to when I was prepping for the PCT, because like I was saying, I was a long distance trail runner before, and I knew how I reacted to food. So when I started thinking about the PCT, I was like, okay, I used to be a triathlete. I used to be a runner. I was very in tune with my nutrition then.
Right.
Why am I not thinking about this when I'm getting ready to climb up Forester Pass? I'm getting ready to carry 30 pounds on my back. I'm going to be on my feet 12 hours a day. Why am I not taking all those factors into account when I would normally do that on a 2-hour run, So when I started thinking of backpacking as this is actually an endurance sport, this needs to be thought about a little bit differently than just going out for a walk.
Yeah. But Pop-Tarts are so easy.
But do you feel very good after you eat them day after day?
No, not really. I'm going to tell you, not really. I strongly advise people to think of alternatives. But mind you, when I first did my first trip, oatmeal was a nightmare for me. I haven't had oatmeal since then. I think it was awful stuff. Yeah. So for those of us who have merely a passing idea and often very little interest, how can you make a balanced diet more accessible for hikers?
Well, like I was saying, that's what I'm trying to encourage people just to think about is take what you already do at home. And you don't really have to reinvent the wheel. Do what you're already doing at home and just translate it into a dried thing. So let's say there are a lot of folks out there that really enjoy dehydrating food. So make a double batch of dinner and then just dehydrate the second serving of it. And then that's what you eat on your next trip. it's really fairly easy once you start thinking about things.
So if you have, say, I don't know, a steak and potatoes or whatever it is, you make that, dehydrate that, and then that will reform with water? Does everything dehydrate?
Not everything. So this is where it takes a little more finesse of knowing which foods do and don't.
Right.
Fat in particular does not dehydrate. So if there is fat in the meal that you're preparing, just make sure you leave that out. And then you add that back in. Let's say you're sauteing some vegetables in whatever you're making. Don't saute them in water instead of the oil, because the oil will go rancid. And then you just add the oil whenever you're eating on trail. So that will make the shelf life a lot longer.
Oh, okay.
And then if there's butter in it, that's where the butter powder comes in. So don't add the butter when you're cooking, add it when you're on trail. I use a lot of coconut oil, so I use that to add some extra calories on trail too.
So, and I love the fact that this means a lot to you as a person, because you see this as almost a crusade, don't you? You really care about this stuff, and that people should really, with a bit of thought, they can give themselves a far better diet when they go on the trail. Because I can tell you, virtually every single shelter I went to, if there were 10 people there, 9 of us had terrible diets on the trail. About probably 10 of us.
Well, it makes me so sad. I mean, dietitian, I'm so passionate about food that it makes me sad to see stories about hikers that have to go home because they did lose so much weight, or they actually have anemia or vitamin C deficiency, or things that could have been prevented
what I was thinking.
by food.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. And it may well be they don't attribute it to their bad diet. They may attribute it to the fact they've just lost too much weight and don't even think about the fact that it's their diet. So a bit of thought, that may help them as well. So let's have a run through on what we should be looking for. Sugar, carbs, proteins and calories and so on. That's the combinations bit, isn't it? So how do you work that out? And is the same proportion effectively for every meal, or as near as possible for every meal?
It's fairly similar for most of the meals throughout the day, but then there's always these cases where some people like to have 3 meals a day with smaller snacks. Some people like to snack throughout the day. So this is where I was saying you look at your day as a whole and whatever works the best for you. So going back to that 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram for protein. So you figure out what that looks like for you. And then for carbohydrate, the goal is for, let's say, a thru hiker, somebody that's going to be out there for at least 2 weeks or more. Carbohydrate is 6 grams per kilogram of body weight. Wow. So then you figure out what that number is for you. And then whatever.
And for those who don't know kilograms, it's a European thing, isn't it? It's say a 220-pound man, which I used to be, I'm heavier than that now, is 100 kilograms. It's 2.2, isn't it?
Right.
100 is 100 pounds. A 220-pound man is 100 kilograms. That's right. It's 2.2 pounds to the kilogram.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's a lot. That's a lot of stuff then, isn't it?
So yeah, it turns out once you start looking at the numbers, but if you start kind of put all the food out on the table when you're at home prepping for your trip and just start kind of looking at it, you'll be surprised at how much you really eat. Right. But when you start paying more attention, you can make better decisions throughout the day, and it really will help you feel better. Right. Because just from personal experience, when I also was on the AT, I was tempted by everybody going into town, having a beer, getting cheeseburgers or whatever, and I didn't eat my own food that I was used to eating, and I felt horrible. So
but
as soon as
burgers are great though. I mean, they
do definitely have them, but I was doing it day after day after day.
So was I. I loved it.
And I felt horrible.
Oh dear. So tell us about sugar, because sugar I know is, and I've one of my listener sent me his book, The Zero Sugar Diet, which was very interesting. And I read it all. I didn't understand a lot of it, but I do know that added sugar is a thing you should be trying to stay away from. Do you think about that much?
I think it just comes naturally with the way that I eat. I don't have to think a whole lot about it because I don't eat a lot of highly processed foods.
Right. Okay.
And sugar is fine. I mean, it's going to give it flavor to things. Then there's actually a lot of natural sugar in things. So sugar otherwise doesn't really have any nutritional value. It only just gives you energy. It's not going to help you with muscle rebuilding. It's not going to help you with your vitamins or minerals. It's not going to help you with those things. It's just going to give you a little bit of boost, but it's digested so quickly that this is when you're going to crash. So if you really rely on heavily sugared items, I know I'm a Sour Patch fan. A lot of you out there are Sour Patch fans too. I mean, there's a time for them, yeah. But then you want to kind of counteract that with also having an even diet throughout the rest of the day.
Sure. So And this, as I said to you earlier, was a difficult conversation for me to have with you because I know nothing about this, I've tried to understand some of it, and I've tried my hardest to ask the questions I think I would have, my listeners would want to know. But do you think can you distill all that knowledge down to just a few takeaways that listeners can think about if they want to start thinking further about this? And one takeaway I would immediately take is try to take a diet that works for you at home and basically dehydrate that. That to me was an interesting thing. So how would you distill that knowledge down to just say one or two takeaways?
That was my very first one, is really take what you already do at home that you know works well for you and just translate into something that's dry that you can take in the backcountry. Because if you already are able to go for hikes during the week or runs or whatever you do for activity during the week and you're feeling great, then you should probably feel just as good with the more calories and those kind of things to make up the energy difference while you're backpacking.
Sure.
And then the other is to really start thinking about backpacking as a sport. I mean, I know it sounds pretty simple, but we spend so much time thinking about all this ultralight gear and how many grams that is, and, and how heavy this is and how light that is, that if we put that same kind of effort into thinking about food, then we could probably stay on trail longer and prevent those hikers from going home just because they're malnourished.
Yes, and that makes all the sense in the world to me, and I know that you have more information to share. And while I didn't want this to be a free advertising spot for you, it seemed quite important to share what you had to say, and you've given your views so generously today, and I really appreciate that. So, tell listeners how they can find out more from you if they want to.
I do have a backpacking nutrition webpage. It's backcountryfoodie.com. That's our business name. And I offer actually an ultralight recipe and meal planning service there. And that's what we're talking about today is my method of meal planning is ultralight. I maximize as much nutrition as possible in the least amount of weight. So essentially like ultralight gear is a high quality gear, very low weight. I do that now with nutrition. So that is on our webpage. And you can also follow me on social media and Instagram and Facebook at Backcountry Foodie. I post a lot of pictures of all of our recipes that we do, and I answer a lot of frequently asked questions. So I truly love helping backpackers. So feel free to reach out in any of those ways, and I'd be happy to help.
That is so cool. That's so cool. Like, you know what? I'm glad we did this. I was dreading it. So because I just don't get it at all. But it's become. I mean, that I need something like that visual of taking away the food you take. I mean, maybe there are people out there listening, thinking, well, I do that all the time. Well, that wasn't my experience of people do through hike. They don't do that all the time. They quickly almost devolve into this rabid dog eating as much sugar as they possibly can. And what you've said that really struck home to me was this thing that, people get off the trail because they're malnourished and they put it down perhaps to something else. And I think if you can save somebody from doing that by just giving a bit more thought to their diet, that would be a really great thing that somebody can think, well, you've helped them finish their hike.
Yeah, that's actually a dream of mine.
Yeah.
I wanted that if that's something that I could help people do, then that just makes my day. I love it.
That I can tell that. But look, thank you so much for chatting to us, and thanks for having the patience to try to get a Wi-Fi spot today as well.
Oh, sure.
Okay. Bye then.
All right. Bye, Steve.
Bye. I found that utterly fascinating, but I can't pretend I understood more than about 20% of it. But it held my attention, and as you could probably hear, it clicked my brain into gear every now and then. Erin is a true expert in this stuff, and there's some excellent links in the show notes. If you're just curious how you can improve your diet on the trail, check out her website. And as she said, she's passionate about helping hikers with their food. So reach out to her and she'll steer you in the right direction. Before we get on to Grandma Gatewood, and partly because we don't have a middle section today, there's a couple of things I wanted to mention. First, thanks again to all of you who have donated to my shows and helped defray some of the costs. I have been truly overwhelmed and so grateful. Whatever you may think, podcasting isn't free for the content creator, and bills have to be paid every month to keep them all live. If you want to contribute to the shows, either monthly or as a one-off payment, you can find a link on the mightyblueontheat.com podcast page. I've been promising to add that donate button to the hikingradionetwork.com page, but I haven't got around to it yet. One thing that I have put on the hikingradionetwork.com site is a cool merch page, which is basically a page that some of you have been asking for, where right now you can get Hiking Radio Network cotton t-shirts and performance hiking shirts. So go check that out as well. The HRN page also has every podcast that we do. Not only does it have the Mighty Blue show, but it has the Trail Dames shows, the Jester section hiking shows, and our new JR Hikes the Appalachian Trail. I'm now putting out 4 shows a week. This show's on a Thursday, the Trail Dames come out on a Tuesday, Jester publishes on a Saturday, and JR is going to be every Monday. It's quite a schedule and there's something for everybody. So thanks if you're already listening to our current shows, and if you're not, we'd love to have you along for some of them. One last thing, I've also got the RTK Full Hike, and that is still getting often more than 100 downloads in a day. And Dix's 2018 CDT hike that has now been made available everywhere, and I think in its first day it got nearly 200 downloads when people realised it was there and for free. So now, with a brand new book, it is Grandma Gatewood's Walk by Ben Montgomery. This woman was a badass before the term was even invented. I'll see you next week. Grandma Gatewood's Walk, the inspiring story of the woman who saved the Appalachian Trail, by Ben Montgomery. Read by Steve Adams. Chapter 1. Pick up your feet. May the 2nd to May the 9th, 1955. She packed her things in late spring when her flowers were in full bloom, and left Gallia County, Ohio, the only place she'd ever really called home. She caught a ride to Charleston, West Virginia, then boarded a bus to the airport, then a plane to Atlanta, then a bus from there to a little picture postcard spot called Jasper, Georgia, the first mountain town. Now here she was in Dixieland, 500 miles from her Ohio home, listening to the rattle and ping in the back of a taxicab, finally making her ascent up the mountain called Oglethorpe, her ears popping, the cabbie grumbling about how he wasn't going to make a penny driving her all this way. She sat quiet, still, watching through the window as miles of Georgia blurred past. They hit a steep incline, a narrow gravel road, and made it within a quarter mile of the top of the mountain before the driver killed the engine. She collected her supplies and handed him $5, then one extra for his trouble. That cheered him up. And then he was gone, tail lights and dust, and Emma Gatewood stood alone, an old woman on a mountain. Her clothes were stuffed inside a pasteboard box, and she lugged it up the road to the summit, a few minutes away by foot. She changed in the woods, slipping on her dungarees and tennis shoes and discarding the simple dress and slippers she had worn during her travels. She pulled from the box a drawstring sack she'd made back home from a yard of denim, her wrinkled fingers doing the stitching, and opened it wide. She filled the sack with other items from the box: Vienna sausage, raisins, peanuts, bouillon cubes, powdered milk. She tucked inside a tin of Band-Aids, a bottle of iodine, some bobby pins, and a jar of Vicks salve. She packed the slippers and a gingham dress that she could shake out if she ever needed to look nice. She stuffed a warm coat, a shower curtain to keep the rain off, some drinking water, a Swiss Army knife, a flashlight, candy mints, and a pen, and a little Royal Vernon Line memo book that she had bought for 25 cents at Murphy's back home. She threw the pasteboard box into a chicken house nearby, cinched the sack closed, and slung it over one shoulder. She stood, finally, her canvas keds tied tight, on May the 3rd, 1955, atop the southern terminus of the Appalachian Trail, the longest continuous footpath in the world, facing the peaks on the blue-black horizon that stretched toward heaven and unfurled before her for days. Facing a mean landscape of angry rivers and hateful rocks she stood, a woman, mother of 11 and grandmother of 23. She had not been able to get the trail out of her mind. She had thought of it constantly back home in Ohio, where she tended her small garden and looked after her grandchildren, biding her time until she could get away. When she finally could, it was 1955, and she was 67 years old. She stood 5'2" and weighed 150 pounds, and the only survival training she had were lessons learned earning calluses on a farm. She had a mouthful of false teeth and bunions the size of prize marbles. She had no map, no sleeping bag, no tent. She was blind without her glasses, and she was utterly unprepared if she faced the wrath of a snowstorm, not all that rare on the trail. 5 years before, a freezing Thanksgiving downpour killed more than 300 in Appalachia, and most of them had houses. Their bones were buried on these hillsides. She had prepared for her trek the only way she knew how. The year before, she worked at a nursing home and tucked away what she could of a $25 a week paycheck until she finally earned enough quarters to draw the minimum in Social Security, $52 a month. She had started walking in January while living with her son Nelson in Dayton, Ohio. She began walking around the block and extended it a little more each time until she was satisfied by the burn she felt in her legs. By April, she was hiking 10 miles a day. Before her, now, grew an amazing sweep of elms, chestnuts, hemlocks, dogwoods, spruces, firs, mountain ashes and sugar maples. She'd see crystal clear streams and raging rivers and vistas that would steal her breath. Before her stood mountains, more than 300 of them topping 5,000 feet, the ancient remnants of a range that hundreds of millions of years before pierced the clouds and rivaled the Himalayas in their majesty. The Unicas, the Smokies, Choas, Nantahalas, the long sloping Blue Ridge, the Kittatinny Mountains, the Hudson Highlands, the Taconic Ridge and the Berkshires, the Green Mountains, the White Mountains, the Mahoosuc Range, Saddleback, Bigelow, and finally, 5 million steps away, Katahdin. And between here and there, a bouquet of ways to die. Between here and there lurked wild boars, black bears, wolves, bobcats, coyotes, backwater outlaws and lawless hillbillies, poison oak, poison ivy and poison sumach, anthills and black flies and deer ticks and rabid skunks, squirrels and raccoons and snakes, black snakes, water moccasins and copperheads and rattlers. The young man who hiked the trail 4 years before told the newspapers he'd killed at least 15. There were a million heavenly things to see and a million spectacular ways to die. 2 people knew Emma Gatewood was here, the cab driver and her cousin Myrtle Trowbridge, with whom she had stayed the night before in Atlanta. She had told her children she was going on a walk. That was no lie. She just never finished her sentence, never offered her own offspring the astonishing, impossible particulars. All 11 of them were grown, anyhow, and independent. They had their own children to raise and bills to pay and lawns to mow. The price of participation in the great, immobile American dream. She was past all that. She'd send a postcard. If she told them what she was attempting to do, she knew they'd ask, why? That's a question she'd face day and night in the coming months, as word of her hike spread like fire through the valleys, as newspaper reporters learned of her mission and intercepted her on the trail. It was a question she'd playfully brush off every time they asked, and how they'd ask. Groucho Marx would ask, Dave Garroway would ask, Sports Illustrated would ask, the Associated Press would ask, the United States Congress would ask. Why? Because it was there, she'd say. Seemed like a good lark, she'd say. She'd never betray the real reason. She'd never show those newspaper men and television cameras her broken teeth or busted ribs, or talk about the town that kept dark secrets or the night she spent in a jail cell. She'd tell them she was a widow. Yes, she'd tell them she found solace in nature, away from the grit and ash of civilization. She'd tell them that her father always told her, pick up your feet, and that, through rain and snow, through the valley of the shadow of death, she was following his instruction. She walked around the summit of Mount Oglethorpe, studying the horizon, the browns and blues and greys in the distance. She walked to the base of a giant, sky-reaching monument, an obelisk made from Cherokee marble. She read the words etched on one side. In grateful recognition of the achievements of James Edward Oglethorpe, who by courage, industry and endurance founded the Commonwealth of Georgia in 1732. She turned her back on the phallic monument and led off down the trail, a path that split through ferns and last year's leaves and walls of hardwoods sunk deep in the earth. She walked quite a while before she came upon the biggest chicken farm she had ever seen. Row upon row of long, regular barns, alive with babble and bordered by houses where the labourers slept. Immigrants and sons of the miners and blue-collar men and women who made their lives in these mountains. She had walked herself to thirst, so she knocked on one of the doors. The man who answered thought she was a little loony, but he gave her a cool drink. He told her there was a store nearby, said it was just up the road. She set off, but didn't see one. Night fell, and for the first time she was alone in the dark. The trail cut back, but she missed the identifying blaze and kept walking down a gravel road. After 2 miles, she came upon a farmhouse. 2 elderly folks, a Mr. and Mrs. Mealer, were kind enough to let her stay for the night. She would have been forced to sleep in the forest, prone to the unexpected, had she not lost track. She set off early the next morning as the sun threw a blue haze on the hills after thanking the Mealers. She knew she had missed the switchback, so she hiked back the way she had come for about 2 miles, and all along the roadside she saw beautiful sweet shrub blooming, smelling of allspice. She caught the trail again and lugged herself back up to the ridge, where she reached a level stretch and pressed down hard on her old bones, foot over foot, going 15 miles before dark. The pain was no problem, not yet, for a woman reared on farm work. She stumbled upon a little cardboard shack, disassembled it, and set up several of the pieces on one end to block the angry wind. The others she splayed on the ground for a bed. As soon as she lay down, her first night in the woods, the welcoming party came calling. A tiny field mouse, the size of a golf ball, began scratching around her. She tried to scare the creature away, but it was fearless. When she finally found sleep, the mouse climbed upon her chest. She opened her eyes, and there he was, standing erect on her breast, just 2 strange beings, eye to eye, in the woods. 100 years before Emma Gatewood stomped through, before there was even a trail, pioneers pushed west over the new country's oldest mountains, through Cherokee land, the determined Irish and Scottish and English families driving toward the sinking sun, and some of them falling behind, some of them settling. They made these mountains, formed more than 1 billion years before of metamorphic and igneous rock, their home. Appalachia it was called, a term derived from a tribe of Muskogean Indians called the Appalachee, the people on the other side. The swath was beautiful and rugged, and those who stayed lived by axe and plough and gun. On the rich land they grew beets and tomatoes, pumpkins and squash, field peas and carrots, but mostly they grew corn. By the 1940s, due to the lack of education and rotation, the land was drained of its nutrients and crops began to fail. But the people remained, buckled in by the mountains. Those early settlers were buried on barren hillsides. The threadbare lives of their sons and daughters were set in grooves, a day's drive from 60% of the US population, but cut off by topography from outside ideas. They wore handmade clothing and ate corn pone, hickory chickens and fried pies. The pigs they slaughtered in the fall showed up on plates all winter as sausage and bacon and salted ham. They went to work in the mines and mills, risking death each day to light the homes and clothe the children of those better off, while their own sons and daughters did schoolwork by candlelight and wore patches upon patches. Mining towns, mill towns, and small industrial centres bloomed between the mountains, and the dirt roads and railroads soon stitched the little communities together. They were proud people, most of them, the durable offspring of survivors. They lived suspended between heaven and earth, and they knew the call of every bird, the name of every tree, and where the wild herbs grew in the forest. They also knew the songs in the church hymnals without looking, and the difference between predestination and free will, and the recipe for corn liquor. They resisted government intervention, and when taxes grew unjust, they struck out with rakes, rebellion and secrecy. When President Rutherford B. Hayes tried to implement a whiskey tax in the late 1870s, a great fit of violence exploded in Appalachia between the moonshiners and the federal revenuers that lasted well through Prohibition in the 1920s. The lax post-Civil War law and order gave the local clans plenty of leeway to shed blood over a misunderstanding or a misfired bullet. Grudges held tight, like cold tree sap. When the asphalt was laid through the bottomland, winding rivers of road, it opened the automobile-owning world to new pictures of poverty and hard luck. The rest of America came to bear witness to coal miners and moonshiners and a region in flux. Poor farming techniques and the loss of mining jobs to machines prompted an exodus from Appalachia in the 1950s. Those who stayed behind were simply rugged enough, or conniving enough, to survive. This was Emma Gatewood's course, a footpath through a misunderstood region stitched together on love and danger, hospitality and venom. The route was someone else's interpretation of the best way to cross a lovely and rugged landscape, and she had accepted the invitation to stalk her predecessors, this civilian army of planners and environmentalists and blazers, and in a way to become one of them, a pilgrim herself. She came from the foothills, and while she didn't know exactly what to expect, she wasn't a complete stranger here. Her legs were sore when she set off a few minutes after 9 a.m. on May the 5th, trying to exit Georgia. She hiked the highlands until she could go no farther. Her feet had swollen. She found a lean-to near a freshwater spring where she washed out her soiled clothes. She filled a sack full of leaves and plopped it on a picnic table for a makeshift bed. The next morning she started before the sun peeked over the hills. The trail through the heart of Cherokee country was lined by azaleas, and when the sunbeams touched down they became flashes of supernatural pinks and purples in the grey-brown forest. Once in a while she'd stop mid-step to watch a white-tailed buck bound gracefully across her path and disappear into the woods. Once in a while she'd spot a copperhead coiled in the leaves, and she'd catch her breath and provide the creature a wide berth. That night she drank buttermilk and ate cornbread, the charity of a man in town, and spent the night at the Doublehead Gap Church in the house of the Lord. That's how it was in some places. They'd open their ice boxes and church doors and make you feel at home. Some places, but not all. She was off again the next day, past a military base where soldiers had built dugouts and stretched barbed wire all over the mountains, a surreal juxtaposition of nature and the brutality of man. She pressed on through Woody Gap, approaching the state line. She was joined there by an old, tired-looking mutt, and she didn't mind the company. She climbed a mountain, cresting after 7 p.m., the sun falling. She'd have to find a place to stay soon. She followed the bank of a creek down into the valley where several small houses stood. They were ugly little things, but there was a chance one would yield a bed or at least a few bales of hay. Anything was better than shaking field mice out of her hair in the morning. In the yard of one of the puny homes, she noticed a woman chopping wood. It looked as if the woman's hair had not been combed in weeks, and her apron was so dirty it could have stood on its own. Her face was covered with grime, and she was chewing tobacco, spitting occasionally in the dirt. The woman stopped as Emma approached. "Have you room for a guest tonight?" Emma asked. "We've never turned anyone away," the woman said. Emma followed her onto the porch, where an old man sat in the shade. He wasn't nearly as dirty as the woman, and he looked intelligent and suspicious. This was the tricky, treacherous part of the trail, scouting for a bed among strangers. She had not prepared for this part of the experience, for she never knew these negotiations would be necessary. There, on the stranger's porch, she wasn't afraid so much as embarrassed. She told the man her name. "You have credentials?" the man asked. She fetched a social security card from her sack and handed it over. He studied the card as the mutt that followed her down the hollow sniffed out a comfortable spot on the porch. Emma fished out some pictures of her family, her children and grandchildren, and presented those too, for further proof that she was who she said she was, but the man was suspicious. "Is Washington paying you to make this trip?" the man asked. "No," Emma said. She told him she was doing it for herself, and she had every intention of hiking all 2,050 miles of it, to the end. She just needed a place to spend the night. "Does your family approve of what you're doing?" asked he. "They don't know," said she. He regarded her, an old woman in tapered dungarees and a button-up shirt, her long grey hair a mess, her thin lips and fat, fleshy earlobes, her brow protruding enough to shade her eyes at their corners. She hadn't seen a mirror in days, but she reckoned she looked hideous. "You better go home then," he said. "You can't stay here." There wasn't any use in fighting. She knew where she was. She hefted a sack onto her shoulder again, turned her back on the man and his worn-out wife, and started walking.